Okay, if you have filled this pre-test, can you indicate with your favorite emoji? Please indicate if you have filled. Thank you. Please, we are still expecting more participants to fill. Thank you to those that have submitted. Remember, we are not scoring you. Thank you. Please, we encourage all participants to fill the pre-test. Remember, we are not scoring you. Oh, wow. Thank you. We are making good progress. Please kindly fill the pre-test. Only 48% of us have done that. We'll be ending the pre-test in a minute's time. Okay, at this point, I would like to hand over to our facilitator. But before that, Dr. Olutayo Adeyemi is a public health nutritionist and food science researcher working as a nutrition knowledge broker in Nigeria. In this role, she helps bridge research, policy, and practice by making data more accessible and actionable. Her contributions include supporting the development and sustainability of the Nigerian food system dashboard, institutionalization of routine monitoring of the cost of healthy diets, strengthening of food security and diet quality indicators in national data systems, and promoting of greater alignment of food and nutrition policies across sectors. Dr. Olutayo consults with government agencies and development partners, and also serves as associate lecturer in the Department of Human Nutrition and Dietetics at the University of Ibadan. It may interest you to know that she teaches food and nutrition policy and co-supervises postgraduate research. It is also worthy to note that Dr. Olutayo holds a PhD in nutritional sciences with a policy focus from Cornell University. The next person you will be hearing and seeing is Dr. Olutayo Adeyemi. Over to you, Ma.
Hello, everyone. Good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you're joining us from. I'm very delighted to be here today and to share with you about secondary data. As we proceed, please, Chinasa already said this, but I'll reiterate it again. If you have a question, you can put it in the chat box at any time. Thank you. And so I will just go on to share my slides. Can you see my slides?
Yes,
we can.
Okay. Okay, yes. So today we are going to be talking about leveraging secondary data to evaluate the quality of scholarly outputs. And today is the first of 2 days, today webinar series. So today is part 1. And the objective of this series is to empower nutrition researchers to effectively use secondary data to produce impactful policy relevant research. And when we say policy relevant, it means that research that provides information that addresses the needs of a significant proportion of the population, above 90%, such that if the government were to establish practices and protocols based on that data, it would be able to achieve change over a large number of people. And so today we'll be looking at the value of secondary data and discussing secondary data sources. And then tomorrow we'll be doing more of a demonstration, just the basics of, okay, so how do you download data from a secondary data source? When you download the data, what are the first things you do and all of that to enable you use the data? I would say at this point that this webinar will not be addressing data analysis. So I will not be talking about how to analyze data. It is expected that coming for this webinar, you either have basic knowledge of data analysis and statistical tests you need to analyze data, or you plan to acquire the needed knowledge and skills after this webinar. We won't have time to go over data analysis. Okay, so when we talk about secondary data, so to help us, I'll first of all differentiate between primary data. So I'm in Nigeria, and I know it's the same for many African countries, maybe not so much on other continents, but a lot of the time here, we use primary data for our research. Primary data is data that you collect firsthand. You yourself collect the data, or maybe your supervisor or someone on your research team will collect the data firsthand. And you tailor it to your objectives. So you have your research objectives and you think, oh, okay, what questions can I ask people to be able to answer these questions? And then you go out to collect the data. So it's usually tailored to your research objectives, but because of the costs involved in data collection, it usually involves a small sample size. I mean, even for PhD research here, you see people who do, I think the highest I've seen for PhD research is about 3,000 respondents. And when you have people collecting up to something like 3,000 respondents, what you see is that maybe they just have a very few number of variables that they're collecting. So it's not a long questionnaire. But when you talk about secondary data, okay, so someone said that they can't hear me. So when you talk about secondary data, I hope it's better now. Well, please also check your sound. So when you talk about secondary data is data that somebody else has collected. So just as you collect your data, secondary data is data that has been collected and somebody has now put the data set in a public space. It can be in a private space, but usually for the purpose of our webinar, we're talking about the ones that are in public spaces. So you have it in a public space and you can go there and download it. So when you download a public data set, a secondary data set online, what you get is a file of data that has been collected. It's like you've collected your own data. If you did not use digital tools to collect it, you've already entered it. You have a data set. That's what secondary data is. So it's usually it's collected by other people. It's there, but you can use it for your analysis. And usually secondary data sources, they cover broad topics. So you can have like 20 topics, sometimes less, sometimes more. A lot of times it's representative of geographical locations. So it can be representative at state level or district level, can be representative at country level usually, or regional level. The other thing about secondary data is, well, so part of them, because it is representative, so it usually has the way it is designed to be representative. It also has what we call weights, so that you are using a sample to represent the full population, and so it usually has weights that you can apply to the sample to make your estimates correct for the entire population. And these are not small surveys. So you may see some data sets. I think for Nigeria, for instance, when we look at the demographic health survey for Nigeria, it usually covers over 40,000 households currently. And then I don't know how long the demographic health survey takes, but I know that when you talk to people in the Bureau of Statistics in Nigeria, you ask them how long the living standards measurement survey takes, or those kinds of questionnaires. They'll tell you, oh, for one household, it can take 5 hours. Sometimes it can take 6 hours. So it's a time commitment to collect that data. It is a lot of work to collect the data. And so I just have example here that a primary data is, for instance, you go and do a dietary recall survey by yourself. But a secondary data is when you use DHS, so demographic and health survey data, you analyze that on dietary intake. So somebody has collected data about people's dietary intake and you're just analyzing the data. And then I have this image here that shows that with primary data, is someone actually talking to the respondent to collect data. But in secondary data, it's you sitting at your computer and downloading the data set and working with it. Now, what is the value and relevance of secondary data? First of all, is the cost and time efficiency. So it avoids duplication of data collection. I'm a very big advocate of secondary data. I'm sure you can see it from me choosing this topic for this webinar. And at the university, when I work with students, unless it's a topic that there's no secondary data for, when I work with students, I say they will collect data. I say, when we collect data, they'll say one local government, they will do sample size of 300 and something. And I'll be asking that, why do you want to go and be collecting data when there's already DHS, there's mix. We'll talk about what these acronyms mean as we continue. And other data sets that are representative for your entire state. Why do you want to go and sample 100 people, 200 people, and you generate information? It's not representative for the local government, it's just representative of the sample. So it could mean that it's just something that's happening in the community. There's no government that will take decisions and publish a policy based on what is happening in one community. They have to see that it's happening in more places. So the ability to even generalize from your work and make policy recommendations is very limited. The other thing is that it saves field work time. So if you collect data, the whole process of collecting data before you develop standard questionnaire, test the questionnaire, train people who collect the data, all of these things, you're talking minimum 2 months, 3 months. With secondary data, it saves all that time because the data set is already there. And then the sample size is large. You can generalize with it. You can say, in Nigeria, this is the situation with Nigerian children. This is what is causing, or these are the factors associated with maternal underweight in Mozambique or Ghana or Kenya or whatever country. It also facilitates time trends and cross-country comparability. So there are quite a number of data sets that are collected using the same questionnaire. They are collected at household level in many countries, some almost all African countries, some also in Asia, Latin America, over 100 countries. And so they are collected periodically. So you can check, how has this thing changed over time? How is this thing different from one country to another? Recently, just last year, I had a master's student who was doing a research, and she did the research across West African countries. She used the Demographic and Health Survey, DHS, and she was able to look at the determinants of stunting across West Africa, find out what are the factors that are similar, the determinants that are similar across the countries, what are the factors that may be unique to some countries. And you know, with these commonalities now, it's easy for her to say, oh, I'm sending my research to the Economic Community of West Africa States, ECOWAS, the West African Health Organization, to say, oh, you're working on a nutrition strategy. These are important determinants that we found that are common across West African countries. You can't do that with a single country data. Imagine if you wanted to collect the data by yourself for all these countries. It will take too much time, it will cost too much, and all of that. So this is one of the value of secondary data. The other thing is data quality and credibility. The methodology is rigorous, the training is rigorous. For some of these surveys, they are training for 2 weeks. You want to collect data, you call some enumerators together, maybe you give them talk of like 2 hours or 1 hour, you say, oh, I trained them. And then you put them on the field and they collect data. The way this person asks the question is different. We don't have a lot of time, but I can tell you stories of research I've done that you will look at the results and you say, yeah, what is this? You will know that the person that asked the question, for sure, the way they asked the question was bad. For instance, there was one survey that I was supposed to analyze the data. And first of all, some people had analyzed the data and then they said, the donor is complaining that the results are bad or that the results are not credible. I think that was the issue. They were not credible. And I looked at the data and I said, how can you say that minimum dietary diversity out of 10, the average is 9 point something? I said, it's not possible. Even rich people, they're not eating 9 point something food groups. So how can you interview low income people, over 500 people, and the average is 9 point something out of 10? I said, for sure, the way they asked the question, the person asked in a leading manner, so that maybe the respondents to the women were just saying, and the person was just thinking, yes, yes, yes. That's the only way you can get 9 point something. That will never happen. Well, let me not say never, but that is hardly likely to happen with this kind of surveys, because the process of training, the checks that are put in place for data quality is so robust that it is difficult to have those kinds of errors. And then most of the time, the surveys are led by government institutions. So it is credible for the government. For instance, the National Statistical Office, government office, cannot come and do research now or collect data and present it to their government, and government say, no, it is a lie. Then it means that you are saying that you don't trust your own institutions that you have put in place. And that is why these reports, like inflation reports of countries, they are always published by the National Statistical Office. You never see it being published by a third party, because then the government can say, no, it's propaganda, it's our enemies that are giving us these inflation figures. But when is your agencies that are giving it, then you trust that, oh, whatever these people are telling me, for sure they've done a good work. They are not going to cook figures. So these data are considered to be very credible and of good quality. I've already talked about the policy relevance. The other thing is that because it's government that is leading these surveys, it also means that they make sure that the data that is being collected is the data they need. So it's aligned with maybe the indicators that are in their policy or other kinds of things like that, so that it's not that we're spending money to collect data, then we still won't have the information we need. No, they will have the information they need. And the other thing is that the second data supports reproducibility. That's the ability to reproduce findings. So there in literature, there have been so many examples of people saying, when funders started saying, oh, you have to publish the data you collect, and then people publish their data, and other researchers take it and try to reproduce the research, and they come up with different answers and say, how did you get the answer? And then find out that maybe researchers made mistakes or there have been lapses here and there. With secondary data, it makes everything transparent. You know, I was working on demographic and health survey one time. I had found a senior researcher published how do you say, a senior researcher published something. I found it online and I was working in the same data set. It was DHS 2008. And when I did my analysis, I got something different. I was not like, how can this senior researcher get this thing? The first thing, no, actually, when I saw his analysis and I looked at his figures, I was like, this is wrong. Because the reports that came with the survey got the same answer that I got, and published the same answer that I got. So I was like, how come this one is data was almost half? And I troubleshooted with the software I was using until I found out what the person did to get that answer. And really, it was how do you say? It was an error, data analysis error, a big data analysis error. But this is the value of secondary data. It's transparent. So it was clear that, okay, this person has made a mistake. You shouldn't trust this result. So I have two questions on the chat and I'll quickly take them. So someone is asking, Awal Ahmed is asking, why do academic institutes always reject secondary data in academic research? Discouraging systematic review research and assuming that unless you collect primary data, your research, I assume this will not be trusted. So we talk more about ethics in use of secondary data. I've faced this a lot when I started being an associate at UI. A lot of the times, many of my students use secondary data. I have students that collect primary data, but like I said, it's when there's no secondary data available. Because I found out that particularly for BSc, MSc research, the funds you have available, you are not able to do high quality research. And so there's no point, rather than wasting your resources, just analyze the existing one and bring out critical information we can use. I think part of the reasons why academic institutions reject it, and is an African Nigerian problem, is because, first of all, they feel it can be is not rigorous enough. So the objective of doing project in final year is to enable students go through the process of scientific inquiry. And so when you use secondary data, you lose all that experience of writing out a questionnaire, going through the process of data collection, community entry, data collection, and all of that. And so it creates a gap in your learning. And we'll talk about how you can still use secondary data and address that gap. Another thing is that there's a lot of, how do you say? There's a lot of, I mean, research fraud can happen even with primary data collection, but some people believe that the potential for fraud is higher with secondary data. But what I've found is that a lot of times people don't understand it. A lot of people don't realize that the surveys they trust so much, like DHS and the mix, that the data is actually publicly available and anybody can take it and analyze it. And so these are some of the gaps I've found. So it's about changing organizational culture. In University of Ibadan now, the nutrition department, we don't have that issue anymore. Now they accept secondary data analysis. I've had both masters and PhD students who have used secondary data for their work. For masters, I've had students that use secondary data completely. It's not allowed to do that for PhD. I mean, nutrition completely. Maybe if you're in economics or other social sciences, yes. But in nutrition, it's not allowed to use secondary data completely, which is understandable. And so what we usually do is we collect additional data. And it's one of the things I'll talk about now of how kind of additional data that you can collect and how to go about that. And then Evelyn Nakibe says there are some research that requires primary data like randomized control trials. Yes, it's not just randomized control trials. There are several cases whereby the question you want to answer, it hasn't been the topic of a survey, and so the data just does not exist in a secondary data source. And then, yes, if you want to do a randomized control trial where you want to find out the cause, not just the factors that are associated, you want to find out the cause, then you need to collect primary data. But I would say that in a lot of cases, very few people do randomized control trials in Nigeria and Africa. The cost of a randomized control trial is so expensive that very few people do it. The kind of scholarly output we produce, they are not randomized control trials, but we are missing out a lot on using secondary data. And I'll show you profiles of people who have published extensively based on secondary data. And they've gone far. They are renowned professors because they leverage on secondary data, not just expecting that all the time they have to collect primary data. The other thing is that if you're going to make policies, most of the times you don't make policy on the basis of one randomized control trial. And even if you're making randomized control trial, it's just one of the pieces of evidence you use. You need observational studies, including those that come from secondary data, because that is the one that is generalizable to the population. And you can then triangulate it with the findings from the randomized control trial. But randomized control trial alone cannot be used for decision making. It's just one of the pieces in a puzzle for a research question. Okay, so these are just some examples. You can have someone use DHS, and again, DHS is demographic and health survey. Someone can use the data to examine determinants of stunting across the streets in Kenya. You can have the living standard measurement study. Surveys using that method. There can be a multi-country analysis of the LSMS to reveal association between farm diversity and diet diversity. You can also do time trend analysis using multiple DHS rounds to find out what has changed over time. So now these are just three. It's not that I pick the top or the worst or anything. So if this professor is a university, he has over 176,000 citations, and a majority of those citations, over 150,000 of them, are in the last 5 years. He has an H index of 84 and an I-10 index of 139. I picked this, I sniped these profiles from Google Scholar. Go on Google Scholar and go and look at the papers he publishes. A lot of them are from secondary data analysis, not from data that he collected himself. The same with Cesar Victoria. So if you know Cesar is like when you're looking at Lancet Nutrition Series 2008, Lancet Nutrition Series 2013, Lancet Nutrition Series 2021. Cesar is the first author in, I think, all three series, or maybe at least two of them. Like he's one of the renowned international nutrition professors. He has over 172,000 citations on Google Scholar. He has H-index of 181. That means he has 181 publications that have been cited at least 181 times. He has I-10 index of 858. That means he has 858 publications that have been cited at least 10 times. I don't know the total number of publications he has, but this is his profile. And if you go and look at it again, most of those papers are using secondary data, systematic reviews, meta-analysis, and all of that. And then you have this fairly young guy, Dr. Israel Agaku, who has H-index of 41, I-10 index of 113, and almost all his publications, I looked, I didn't find anyone actually that relies on primary data. He does a lot of behavioral research, mostly around tobacco use and things among adolescents. And so when you look at his profile, then you also see that this is somebody that has relied on. So this I-10 index, if you have been publishing, first of all, the publications you will be publishing in and you have H index and I-10 index, it means that they are indexed journals. They are not just anyhow journals. And then to have this citation profile is not, it means the kind of research you publish, they are useful. People find them useful. And then for people to be having this level of scholarly output and they're not collecting the data, it is data that is publicly available to all of us that they are using to, that they're leveraging over their research outputs. Professor Ogbo is of Nigerian descent, even though he's in Australia now. So Dr. Agaku is also Nigerian. Cesar Victoria is from Brazil, I think. But it's like I said, these were just people, they're people from many countries, different countries that are leveraging on secondary data to produce high quality research, and it's helping them to advance professionally. I have Onoso Lesena that is asking, there's no national survey of secondary data on older adults. So how do you get to investigate their status, changes in nutrition studies? So this is part of when I said that you, how do you say, there are some topics that the secondary data does not exist. When you look at Nigeria, for instance, one of the things you can see is that the prevalence of the elderly, 60 and above, or let's say standard definition, maybe 65 and above, the population is really small. It's just about 3% or so. I can't remember the exact numbers, but it's small. And when governments want to focus on making policy and all that, like I said, they focus on things that affect a huge part of the population. And so sadly, the elderly are not a priority group for surveys. But there are other countries. So yes, it doesn't exist in Nigeria, but there are other countries. We'll talk about triangulation. You can analyze what is happening in multiple countries. I know we like to believe that our country is unique and this is unique, but the truth is that the Bible will say there's nothing new under the sun. There's no problem that you're facing that nobody else has faced before. There's no problem that your country is facing that no other country on the face of this earth has faced before, or that there are no countries that have solved. So if you don't have the data for Nigeria, you can first of all do a representative study using the secondary data from countries that have the data, understanding what are the likely challenges in the area you want to study, and then you can ground truth it. And there will be things that they collect that you can find for older adults. You can do a systematic literature review, for instance, on the studies that already exist for elderly in Nigeria. Start from there, collate some strong evidence on your topic, both from systematic review for Nigerian studies and then secondary data analysis of data from other countries, and then the primary data you collect will be, first of all, even if it may be small, or even if it's the same quantity you'd have collected anyway, you'll be able to make stronger, your findings will be stronger, they'll be more credible because of the process that you have followed and the fact that you have triangulated the data using multiple sources. And we'll talk more about this as we go along. So yes, there are some things. I think I have one of my students that worked on school feeding in Nigeria. There was no data on school feeding. There's still no, she had to collect primary data. I think she's still doing PhD. She still had to collect primary data even after many years because the data just does not exist. So yes, there are cases where it's not that we are saying you will never collect primary data again. It's just that before you collect primary data, it will be necessary, and you'll be using it to triangulate such that the quality of research you are producing is higher than if you just collect the primary data that you would usually collect. Now, when we talk about commonly used secondary data sources for nutrition, the one that we are most familiar about, and that's the one I've mentioned a lot since we've been talking, is household and individual level data. So when you have national surveys such as the Demographic and Health Survey, multiple indicator cluster survey mix, or the Living Standards Measurement Study surveys, Living Standard Measurement Studies, LSMS. So those collect data from individuals and households, or individuals within households. Then when you have, but you also have administrative data. Administrative data usually comes from service delivery. So the classic example that many countries have in Africa is the Health Management Information System that is collected using DHIS2 platform, so the District Health Information System platform. And what this administrative data is that when you go to health facility, they collect data from you. They collect your name and your age, this. If you go for maybe antenatal, a pregnant woman that goes for antenatal, they'll collect her weight, her height, they can measure her blood pressure, they can, all of these things, they enter it in a register and then they upload it onto the DHIS2 platform, such that using that data, you can calculate from in 2025, what percent of women that came from antenatal were underweight? What percent of women that came from had anemia? You can actually use that data. Because of the way our health facilities are, there are many health facilities, for instance, that maybe they don't upload their data. In that case, if you go to the health facility, I've had colleagues who have done that. You go to the health facility, they will have paper file. It's just that it's a cumbersome process. You can painstakingly sit down, get permission, and you get those files. You sit down, you already have your computer with the template, and you'll be entering the data one by one. It's administrative data, it's secondary data source. If you sat down with files and enter data, maybe in one day, you can enter for, I don't know, maybe 30, 50 people. If you were going to go and look for pregnant women directly to interview and collect data, how many pregnant women will you interview in a day? How many will you find even? So that's also a form of secondary data. Then you have market and economic data, usually around food prices, that are collected by national statistical offices like Nigeria Bureau of Statistics. The World Food Program also collects food price data, and then the FuseNet, Farming Early Warning System Network, they also collect food price data. That's also data that can be analyzed and findings can be made from it. That's the data. The food price is what is used, and other prices are what are used to calculate inflation. So they are also a rich source of data. Then you have data sources like Global Dietary Database, FAO Food Balance Sheets, that publish nutrition specialized data. The only thing about these data sources is that they don't have subnational level data. So for instance, you can't go there, you find data about districts in Kenya or Ghana or states in Nigeria. It's only national level. So one data point per year for the indicator for the country. So you can use it for cross-country comparison, You can use it for comparison of various indicators within the same country, but you cannot use it to analyze what's happening at household level or what's happening at some national level to be able to make tailored interventions and things like that. They have research repositories. They're becoming more common now as more funders require you to publish your data. So one is the Harvard Dataverse, where researchers actually go and they deposit data sets. So when they've collected data sets, they will also make their data set like secondary data and put it on that place. You have the World Bank Microdata Library. You have the World Health Organization Global Health Observatory. All of these are also data repositories, collecting data from many different sources to put together on many topics. But again, the Harvard Dataverse is based on the files that researchers put in them. But these other ones, the World Bank and WHO, is happening across countries, but it's not so much useful. Um, um, it's not so much useful for some national data analysis. Okay, so now a lot of surveys, because that's one enable. In many countries, you have food security also being collected. In several countries, food security is also collected. Then you have the Living Standard Measurement Study, with a particular survey, integrated surveys on agriculture. It collects data on agricultural production, consumption, income, and food security. And again, collected across multiple countries. Then you have the Multiple Indicator Cluster Survey. The Living Standard Measurement Study is led by the World Bank. The Demographic and Health Survey used to be funded by USAID, and they've been funding the same organization for, I think, over 10 years now to do the survey. So with USAID funding that has left now, the organization has started to receive funding from other sources to continue the DHS surveys. And then you have the Multiple Indicator Cluster Survey that is led by UNICEF. It's similar to the DHS. It's just DHS is broader in scope. But the Multiple Indicator Cluster Survey also collects data about child nutrition, education, and WASH. With DHS, it's not just children, it collects for women too. So things like family planning, reproductive health, HIV/AIDS, and even malaria are things you can find in the DHS. Okay, so I've been talking. Let's just do this activity and you can put your comments in the chat box. Think of a research idea that you worked on recently.
Excuse me, ma.
Yes?
Okay, ma, we can't see your screen. Can you please share it?
Oh, sorry.
Okay, ma.
Okay. Can you see it now?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
So yes. So yes, think about a research idea you worked on recently. Could secondary data have answered that question faster or more comprehensively? We had, sorry, Ono, I can't pronounce your full name, so I'll just say Ono. She talked about, she did a systematic literature review and a primary data collection for her work. So systematic literature review is also relying on secondary data based on work that have been done by other people. But yes, who are those who have worked on research recently? And what type of data did you use? And could your question have been answered using secondary data? Or are you like Ono who worked on the elderly and so there was no secondary data available? Oh, so sorry. Forgive me, please. I don't know why I assumed this is female. Sorry. I'm waiting. It's not only me that we talk in this. Oh, you just have the video or you are doing people are doing other things.
Yeah, hello. Are we allowed to say something? Because
Yes.
I really do not have a lot of time typing. All right. So I am actually unsolicited now. All right. I am rounding up, finalizing my PhD research at the University of Sheffield, United Kingdom.
I'm so hungry.
So I'm finalizing, like I said, I'm finalizing my PhD research at the University of Sheffield, United Kingdom. All right. So, um, you know, actually, because of my love for Nigeria, I had always wanted to do a studies concerning Nigerian older adults. All right, because that is actually the population that is less under research. And so I conducted a systematic literature review, which is based on secondary data actually. So I quite when I saw this your email, I quite derived interest, and I said yes, I must have to be here. And this actually really opens opportunities for collaborations. All right, which I'm very much interested in. So so far so good. Thank you for your
Mr. I can't
analysis.
hear
Thank you
you.
for everything. But I have my own issue is that secondary data. My colleagues who use secondary data, their work was quite easier than myself. I have to travel from UK to Nigeria to collect primary data twice. The first one was I spent 5 months in Nigeria, and the second time I spent 2 months in Nigeria when I came to do the qualitative. So just to let the other participant know that what you've been saying has been quite very apt, that in Nigeria, I think we should think about having a national survey, all right, of the older adults, because the population of older adults in Nigeria is increasing as well. Population is growing, older adults is growing too, and they should be part of the population to be considered. And you know that our social system in Nigeria and our welfare system in Nigeria concerning both the underage, adolescents, maternal, but the older adults is worst of it all, especially when they don't earn pensions, when the government is not doing something well at all. And policy has not really favored them, especially findings from my research. All right. And so I'll just stop there for the now. Thank you very much. Cheers.
I'll just say that thank you very much for sharing your adult.
Wow, I think Dr. Olutayo is having network issue. Let's hold on and have her rejoin
Okay,
soon.
yeah,
She's back.
sorry, my network has yeah, so sorry, I've turned off my video to help with my bandwidth. But yeah, so I know that the new national policy that the draft is ongoing, the elderly have been included, that the policy will focus on. And so hopefully we will have data being collected about the elderly soon that we can leverage on. And it could just be expanding existing surveys to survey. So now I'll talk about the ethical considerations for using secondary. Okay, before I continue, I saw that Olufunmilayo said that there was secondary data, but that the keepers were not willing to release the data. So what can one do to access the data? I think if the secondary data and it requires institutional arrangements, then it will mean that you have to do a lot of community entry before you can do your work. Are the people that can input data, and that organization would release it. Then you partner with the people. You go to meet with them. Oh, this is my research idea. It's very important we know about this. It's not going to cost you any money, but if we do this research, we find out the information, you'll be able to take this decision. You'll be able to sell the research idea to them, and you say that the data sources with these people. So all you need to do is to ask them to release the data source, and then you partner with them. When we started working on institutionalizing cost of healthy diets in Nigeria, and it uses data on food prices, and we approached so when we were interested in it, we sold the idea to the Ministry of Agric. The Ministry of Agric caught the idea. The minister wrote to the Statistician General to say, we want this data, we want to do this work. It took us more than, I think the first set of data, it took us like maybe 1.5 years or so to get it. And when the letter went to the National Bureau of Statistics, Bureau says, look, we cannot release, this is a sensitive data, we use it for inflation, that's what is used for. Consumer price index is used for this. We cannot give you the data set. And we negotiate, we say, look, we don't need the data sets. All the entire data set, we just need this particular aspect of the data set. So give us this aspect and don't give us the rest. And they said, it's going to take us time to extract that one from full data set. I said, no problem, we'll work with you. And that was what happened. Eventually, when we did back and forth and we wanted to start calculating the indicators, one of the easiest ways was for NBS to calculate it themselves using the data. So in this case, they don't even have to release the data to anybody, just calculate. But by the time we had moved to that point, even though they were calculating it by themselves, anytime we say, oh, we want the data, we want to use it for research, they'll say, oh, you can have it, and they'll give it to us. They weren't giving us the full data set, but they were giving all the food prices. If you look at the food price watch that NBS will publish, they will publish maybe 40-something food items, but they're actually collecting data on over 200 food items. And so we're able to collect the price for the over 200 food items. So it's managing the institutional. This one, it took us eventually for NBS starts publishing. It took us about 5 years, but it wasn't what we were doing full time too. We were suddenly remember that we've not reached out to NBS in a long time. Okay, let's write to them. It's not we have people that are working on it full time. So it's possible, like I said, approach the people who are in a position of authority over the people that can release the data to you. First of all, the data is not your own. Ownership terms, they will have usage terms. Please respect, because it is secondary data, it doesn't mean you can. There's still something, because of, it can be, your questions can be sensitive, it can make people feel uncomfortable the way you ask, and so it's still required to at least submit ethics application. When you submit an ethics review, oh, this research is exempt, is using, not tell who the data was collected from. There are some people that they will say, this data was collected in my community, my village. Let me try and see, based on the answer to this question, the answer to this question, let me try and see if I know the people that answer this question. That is wrong. You should respect privacy. Never attempt to re-identify individuals or share raw confidential data. Peradventure, it is you who are going to be putting your research data online. Make sure that you de-identify the data. Remove any identifier so that nobody can appropriately. Don't publish on secondary data and you now write it as if it's you that you collected the data. Cite that the data used was XYZ. The person that provided the data will tell you how you should cite their data. Please make sure you do that. And then you have to avoid data dredging. You cannot say because secondary data is available, you just carry the data and you say, let me look at it. What are the variables that are inside? What question can I just magically, what research can I just magically bring out from this thing? You now start something that was not in your head before, just start manufacturing and all of that. So you have to data, I will talk more about this. How do you use it so that you don't do data dredging? The first is that you must have a clear conceptual framework. Just like if you are doing primary data, you are collecting the data, you would have had your research question that you want to address before you go and collect the data. It's the same thing. Even if you are going to use secondary data, you must have the research question before you go and look in the data set to say what is the variable available. Not that you look in the data set and then the variables you see there is what will now inform the research you do. No, that is not how to do good research. Okay, so what are common challenges to secondary data? In fact, I don't have not having access to data here because the ones that I'm focusing on is usually the DHS, LSMS, and MIX that are publicly available. But the most common challenge is that the variable may not perfectly match your research question. You can also have differences in survey design or variable naming across the years, which will then affect how much you can compare. We have the example of Dr. who shared about wanting to assess the status of older adults, women 15 to 49 years old, older than 49. So if you're question assets, another thing is documentation gap or lack of contextual information. If you've ever worked with secondary data, you know it's possible. You will be seeing a variable like this and you'll be wondering, where did this variable come from? You tell your software to describe your data analysis software to describe the data. And you are wondering that, what kind of information is collected here? You look in the manual that came with the data, that variable is not mentioned. You now be wondering that, what is this variable? What can I use it for? Those are challenges, incomplete documentation. So it can either lead to inability to use some variables or misinterpretation of the data. You go and interpret wrongly because what you understood to have been collected is not what was actually collected. Another thing is missing or incomplete data. I remember if you go to the DHS website for Nigeria, Right now, you won't find 1999 DHS. But there was a DHS conducted in 1999. Someone like me, that the first time I downloaded Nigerian DHS was over 15 years ago. So I have that data set. They've removed it now from the website. But why would they remove it? There are some particular variables for child nutrition status, for instance, where 42% of surveyed children had implausible values. When 42% of children have implausible values, then you ask yourself, what's the point? The 58% that don't have implausible values, it may be implausible, but how can you trust the accuracy? And so the quality issues with that survey was so high that they eventually just pulled it out and just said, look, it was collected by local partners. It wasn't collected by DHS. If you are Nigerian and you know that 1999 was the move from military rule to civilian rule, so there was a lot of unrest and things were generally chaotic. So it affected that survey. Usually the missing data is not as bad as that, where 42% of survey children, they don't have data. But missing data can be a big problem. If you are assessing a problem now, maybe the problem affects only 10% of the population, and then you have up to 10% of your population that have missing data. You can analyze and you come up with the wrong conclusion because of the missing data. So it's a challenge. Then you can also have outdated data. I remember that for the Nigeria Food Systems Dashboard, recently when we presented it to government stakeholders, and so it's a good idea, but I am seeing that for many variables, your data set stops at 2018, 2019. That's too, this is 6 years after. How can we be using 2018 data to make any decision? It's too old. So the idea is good, but the data is outdated. So if some surveys that are not conducted regularly, if you want to analyze the data very far from the time that the survey was conducted, it can the analysis can be considered outdated. For instance, now, even in 2021, so the DHS of Nigeria, the last DHS was 2018. But between 2018 and 2021, there was COVID-19. There was inflation, high inflation, Ukraine, Russia war that affected supply chain. Many things happen. And so you'll not be asking yourself, yes, I have this data. It's just 2 years old. But can they really tell me the truth? What is telling me? Can I take it as the truth? Because of the many things that have happened since the data. In a lot of cases, so just one-time points, you have some of their countries that have, including Nigeria, we collect data from them every 2 years. 5 rounds now, so since 2010, and that data is publicly available. So for that, examine what came first and do a lot more with the analysis than just like DHS, there's different households every 5 years. Mix is also every 4 years. It's also different households. A new sample every 4 to 5 years. So that is repeated cross-sectional surveys, and you're not able to make the causal inference. Now, some of the ways you can address these challenges when you are using secondary data. The first thing, and is a mistake that people make, people make this mistake so much. If you are not the one that collected the data, how can you just go and download the data and you start analyzing it without asking yourself, the person that collected this data, what was the objective? How did the person collect it? As you are downloading any data set, download the questionnaire that was used to collect that data. Download the reports of the survey when it was analyzed by those who collected the data. They may not analyze all the variables, but the ones they analyzed and reported, download their reports, because Before someone like me now, when I want to start working on any data set, I'll first of all, the data, the variables they report, I'll first of all generate those variables. If I'm not able to reproduce what they got for those variables, I know that, okay, the one that I can see, I've not reproduced, then how can I be sure of the one that they did not calculate? It cannot be, if the one they calculated is wrong, the one I've done is wrong. For sure, the one they didn't calculate, it will also be wrong because it must mean there's something wrong in what I'm doing. So you download the questionnaire, you download the reports that they published. Most of them, they either have what they call documentation or code book or recode manual. The recode manual will tell you how they coded the variable in the data set. I remember the first time I was going to use DHS data and I downloaded the weight and height data set for children. I now summarized the weight and height. I was saying, no, it's the weight for women, not for children, for women. I was saying 50 something thousand, 60 something thousand, no, what am I, not 6,700 and something, 5,000 something, something. Everything was in thousand. I was like, which kind of weights did these people collect? What is the meaning of this? Then it was my first time ever working with DHS. It's when I now was wondering, how can I deal with this? I now realized, okay, there's a recode manual. When I downloaded the recode manual, it is then the recode manual that this variable is women's weight and it is reported in multiples of 100. So to get the actual weight, you have to divide that variable by 100. Without the recode manual, how will I know? I'll just be thinking that there's something wrong with this data. That one was obvious because I was expecting weights between maybe 50 and 100 or 120. I was seeing things in thousands. But imagine it was a variable where things are not, where it's not very obvious. You look at some data sets. In some data sets, no is 0, yes is 1. In some other data sets, yes is still 1, but no is 2. If you don't look at the recode manual, you don't look at the documentation, you may not know. You just going to be analyzing rubbish. So it's very important as you are downloading the data set, download all the documentation that comes with it, the questionnaire, the code book, the code manual, and the reports. I don't have reports here, but report is very important. The sampling notes, how was the data collected? All of those things, you have to download them. Then you now read it before you work with the data set. Please read the basic information about how the data was collected, the kind of information that was collected, who was interviewed, and then the recode manual, how the data was coded into the data set you have. Don't just go and start working with data sets without doing this. Then you have to harmonize variables, align variables across rounds. Sometimes, for instance, if you want to work across the HSCS, particularly if you're working with things like infant and young child feeding, so a lot of times they don't calculate the final indicator, but there are some indicators like, let's assume that you want to work on, let's say, minimum dietary diversity for children, and you actually see that variable in the data set. It's not there, you have to calculate it yourself, but just imagine it's there. You can't just take that data and start using it. I'm trying to think of an example. Okay, an example I think will probably be maybe indicators around antenatal care and where children were born. The way the variables were calculated and collated in some earlier years of DHS is different from more recent years. Then even when you go to something like child dietary diversity, the way they were defined in previous years has changed because UNICEF and WHO have changed the definition of the indicator. So if you see the variable in one round and you want to do a time trend analysis, ensure first of all from this documentation, how were these variables defined? If, for instance, you want to work with stunting and wasting in any country, and you pick any survey data sets that was collected before year 2006, when the WHO multi-growth center study was done, that gave us the new standards of defining the wait for high Z scores, all the Z scores for young children. It means the standards they used were different. First of all, be sure that as the people that provided this data, have they gone back to recalculate the Z scores using the new standards, or is it the pre-2006 standards? Otherwise, you'll be comparing stunting using the pre-2006 standards with stunting using post-2006 standards, and you'll be saying, this is how something has changed. You are comparing rubbish because the way the variables were calculated were different. So you have to ensure that before you start comparing across countries, across years, that the variables have been calculated the same way. If they were not calculated the same way, recalculate it by yourself. Learn, as I said, I'm not doing statistical analysis in this webinar, but those are things you can do. The other thing is that most of these surveys, when you have secondary data, they will have survey weights, and some of them have analytical weights. Please ensure that you identify what the weight variable is. If you want to use the LSMS for Nigeria, for instance, that you have 5 rounds where there are 1,000 and something households that data has been collected from them for these 5 rounds. That means you have 10, because each round they collect data twice from the household, post-planting and post-harvest. So you have 10 data points of data for these households. Depending on the kind of analysis you want to do, the sampling weight you use is different. So you have to be sure that you know the correct weight to use and you apply it. Otherwise, you say you've done analysis and it's rubbish. So those are ways in which you can avoid error, avoid inconsistency in the analysis. Then we talk about sensitivity analysis, particularly when there's missing data. So I can't remember where I saw that rule, but it's a rule I use that if a data set, maybe I want to run an analysis now, and a variable is missing for more than 5% of the population, that's of the sample, just avoid that variable, or you do what we call multiple imputation to fill in the missing data. And the reason is because if you set the level of significance at 5%, that you accept your probability of decision error as 5%, 0.05, you now have a variable that more than 5% are missing that variable. Already you can introduce error into that analysis because of the missing variable. And so another way you can check the impact of missing data is you can do a sensitivity analysis. If you run your model and that variable missing data is not there, and then you run your model and that variable is there, when the variable is there, yes, the model drops by 5% of the population. But apart from the fact that it drops, look at the coefficients of the other indicators. What is the impact of adding that variable on it? Does it significantly change the conclusions you will draw from the other variables? Those are some of the ways in which you can do sensitivity analysis. Again, the fact that you're using secondary data, it does not remove your responsibility of doing appropriate statistical analysis. In fact, you have more things to be aware of, because if you do primary data, a lot of times your primary data will not include survey weights because it's not designed to be representative of a larger population. It's just designed to be representative of your sample. And so the statistical analysis that comes with secondary data is often, there's an additional layer that if you're using primary data, it's not a complex layer. You just have to be aware that it exists and make sure that you take it into account when you're running your analysis. Then I'll talk more about triangulation. But one of the ways you can ensure that you do good work with secondary data, and this is one of the ways to ensure that more institutions in Nigeria and Africa allow their students to use secondary data, is by what we call triangulation. Triangulation means that you not just use one data set to reach your conclusion or to test your hypothesis or to conduct your study of the research topic. You use multiple data sets And one of the ways you can do with secondary data is you have the secondary data, you analyze it, you've already come up with some insights from it. And then you now pick a small population. It can be small, it doesn't even have to be large. It's better than nothing at all. And you go and ask interviews, conduct interviews to say, okay, some of the something that we have found shows that something, please talk about your own experience. And then people will talk about the experience. You can now compare what did people tell me compared to what the secondary data showed me in the analysis. Where are the points of agreement? Where are the points of disagreement? What can be causing this disagreement? How far ago was my secondary data collected? What are the things that may have changed that is causing the secondary data to be different from what people are telling me now? That is a form of triangulation. Another way is to join research networks or mentorship groups for shared learning. You see, I have a friend that she's always saying, oh, Tayo, I envy you that you have a lot of publications and citations. I was like, for you have citations, as in she has thousands of citations. Me, my citation are still in how many hundred, maybe 200 and something. I said, you have thousands. I said, but that because most of maybe like 6 or 7 of those publications that give her the thousands of publications, they're in this of citations, they're in these research articles that have to do with global burden of disease, where you have 500 and something authors, 700 and something authors. She said that she does not consider those ones to be serious research. And I was laughing because you see, some of the most cited, some of the top authors, the reason why they're like that is because they join research networks or mentorship group. You'll be publishing paper, 2 of you will publish a paper. How much strong research can 2 people do? How much sophisticated analysis can the 2 of you do? Both of you are nutritionists. There's nobody with strong statistical skills. There's no epidemiologist among you. Yes, I know that our institutions, they will say, oh, the way our system currently is, unlike foreign countries, maybe where they look at the strength of the network that produce the research. Here, maybe you get more points when there are just 2 of you. You can be publishing the research that will allow you to be promoted in the Nigerian university or African university. Publish that one. In fact, you don't have to look for index journal because most of the universities currently don't care. You can look for your Nigerian journals and read it. But if you want to advance your scholarly output to be recognized as a scholar internationally, that's internationally competitive, not just local champion, look for research networks to join. Look for people you can collaborate with. Look for people that have the skills that you don't have. That will also help you avoid errors on secondary data analysis. I have some publications. I think my most cited publication uses secondary data analysis. And I've had people tell me that, oh, they really like that publication. I'm the first author, but I had backing. I had like 4 or 5 people on that team that they had worked extensively with DHS data. And I kept telling somebody that the version of the report I wrote for that analysis that they approved and said, okay, you can turn it into a journal now, was version 9. When I now turned it into the journal article, the version of the journal article that said you can submit it to journal was version 5. So that's like 14 iterations of that paper before it went to the journal. And then people will say, oh, now that publication boosted my skills, but it would never have happened if it was not part of the network that I had the opportunity to belong to. You see this collaboration, don't miss it too. If you're working with secondary data especially, some of these things I'm saying, survey weights and all of that, I learned it from working with people. There are some sophisticated analysis. I don't know it. In fact, I have no plans to learn it because it seems as if it's above my head. But I have the people that I know that know it. So anytime I want to do anything on it, I just go and meet them and say, please come and collaborate with me. Let us publish together. You will do this part of the analysis. Me, I'll do this part. And then we'll do it and it will look so beautiful. Now, when we focus on triangulation, I mentioned it already. Triangulation is using multiple approaches, data sources, or perspectives to study a single research question in order to enhance credibility validity, and the depth of findings. It involves cross-verification from 2 or more independent sources of data. When you do triangulation, it increases validity. So it confirms that results are not due to a single data bias. It enhances depth. The first publication I ever published, that publication, I took DHS, I looked at some things I first of all had the model. Like I drew a conceptual framework that if you are going to get to C, A must happen and B must happen. I now looked in DHS. I can't remember where, maybe DHS has only A. So I did DHS with the A that was in DHS. I analyzed it. I now, when then I was doing youth service, that first paper was data from my youth service. I was serving in the East. So I just went to a teaching hospital there, got permission from the leadership, everything. And I only sampled 107 women. I went there, maybe immunization clinic for maybe 3 weeks or so, twice a week. Only 107 women I collected additional data from. I now use it to fill the B parts in that my framework. And then by the time I submitted it, people were like, your first publication, it got accepted in an index journal, and they did not reject, they did not do this one, and they even published it open access. That how did you do it? How did you? When I finished writing, I also had, I looked for international reviewers before I submitted it to journal. They helped me review it, they critiqued it, they panabited the language, they did everything, and I published it. What am I trying to say? I was able to get I could have, in fact, let me not lie, I had collected my data for 107 women. It was at the point in time I wanted to publish that paper. I now looked at the journals I was eyeing. I was like, these journals, they will never accept a paper that is based on 107 women. And I said, okay, what can I do? I can go and look in the national data sets and see what information I can get related to this research question. And so that was what I did. So in that instance, I actually did it backwards. I'd already done my primary data collection before I went into secondary data. Sometimes, depending on the research question you are asking, you can also do it that way. But sometimes it's the primary data you ask, maybe qualitative data, that will inform the hypothesis you now go and test in your secondary data. The critical thing is that you should make sure that your work you are doing is bound by a research question or framework. Then it builds trust. And another thing is that it increases research legitimacy, especially in this era of AI. Recently, I was seeing that some journals, they said they will no longer be publishing papers that are from secondary data only. That's something recent that just happened in 2025. Why? Because they saw that some researchers, they were just putting secondary data sources, they were putting it into AI and just tell the AI to run all kinds of analysis and come up or just automatically write research papers. So they were churning out a lot of papers, publishing a lot of papers, submitting it for publication, but they weren't doing any work. It was not being informed by a research question or a conceptual framework. It was all AI driven. So those are things that if you triangulate, it won't happen. And then when you talk about triangulation, there are different types of triangulation. To be honest, it's AI that gave me these categories. The categories are correct, but you see the type, I don't know if those type really exist because I was just asking AI to help me summarize. So you don't necessarily have to hold the type in your head, but the description, yes, please hold it. So you can have data triangulation where you are triangulating the data from different sources, times, or population. And the classic one that we do a lot is to compare child stunting data from DHS and MICS for the same country to check consistency. And one of the things we found out that, in fact, a lot of times it's not consistent. DHS will say one number, when MICS comes out, it goes down. DHS comes up, it goes up again. It may be MICS that will go up again. And you just see the thing is just doing like zigzag up and down, like wave. And we're wondering, these surveys are based on the same people. And so nationally, the country had to sit down, and this is an example of Nigeria, to agree on, first of all, how they will be collecting the data so that you don't have this undulation. And second, so the methodology and all of that, and the inferences they can make. So it helps you when you triangulate from different sources. It's first of all, it does this credibility thing, all the benefits of triangulation. It can help you achieve that, because when there's consistency, particularly for something like breastfeeding now, you see that DHS and mixed is consistent. The trend you see is the same, because the data was being collected in the same way, and it didn't have some of the measurement issues that DHS versus mixed was having. And so you see that consistency in the story. They have methodological triangulation. That's like the person who talked about using mixed methods. So using more than one method to study a phenomenon is also the example I gave now, where I combined the DHS analysis with a mini survey. I talked about collecting data from 107 women. You can also combine it with qualitative data. So going to talk to people to understand the breadth of their experiences. Okay, DHS has told you this is what is the situation, or Mix has told you this is the situation. You now go with qualitative data to ask, why is this thing happening? How is it happening? That's using methods to triangulate. Then you can triangulate across investigators. I've also been part of research teams that do this. So you have indicators that are calculated. You have the variables in the data set, but the variables, like now, if you want to calculate the food insecurity experience scale, you need the answer to 9 questions to calculate that indicator. No, sorry, not 9, 8 questions to calculate that indicator, and some sophisticated statistical methods. And so when I once worked with FAO, and when we do a food security and vulnerability survey, and we are going to write the reports, one person does not do the analysis. There'll be 2 analysts working. They are working independently, would have done schedule. These are the order of indicators. So as you calculate the indicator, you compute the indicator, you calculate the percentage. They say, have you finished this one? You say, what was your answer? But when you see the answers are different, you say, my answer is different from your own. Now walk backward to see, how did we calculate? What does the manual for calculation state? Is there one of us that did not follow protocol? Is there one of us that made mistake? And in the guy I used to work with then, I used to use data, he used to use SPSS. And so the 2 methods too, the 2 different tools was also, sometimes the issue will come from, because the way SPSS codes is different from the way Stata codes. So there could, sometimes an error will come because, the person forgot that, with this software, you're supposed to take this into account, or with that software, you're supposed to take this into account. But you see that investigator triangulation, it helped us so that by the time we come and say, this is the food security situation for Nigeria,
I think Dr. Tayo is having network issue.
everybody has confidence that it's not one person. Yes, 2 people can make mistakes, but the chances are.
Wow. Let's yes, ma'am, can hear you now. We can hear you.
Yeah, so sorry, my network is just misbehaving. So yes, for the theory, for instance, now, if you are trying to explain behavior, you will know that there are different theories of behavior, and you can analyze data using what different theories say. So we are trying to understand people's behavior. If you apply 2 different theories and you look at the determinants of behavior based on 2 different theories, based on the computation for 2 different theories, it can help you. There is triangulation to say, is this is this, how do you say? It strengthens your work, all the benefits of triangulation. A classic one that I use now is when I look at food insecurity. So the food insecurity experience scale is one method. Food consumption score is another method. Household dietary diversity score is another method. They all measure food security, but there are different dimensions of food security, and they do not measure the same dimension of food security. So you check that, okay, if I say this is the prevalence of food security using this method, what is the prevalence of food security using that method? What are the determinants using this method, defining food security this way or with that way? Then you triangulate. That strengthens your conclusion, because if somebody say, but that method is flawed, say yes, but we also use this method. Not this, the theoretical underpinnings of what causes food security using different tools are different. So that's another way you can triangulate. And you can use any or all of these methods, and it will help you achieve the benefits of triangulation that I talked about earlier. Now, I've said a lot of this. When you are using secondary data, to use it responsibly, start with your question. What is your nutrition issue of interest? Don't go and look in the data yet. Just start as if you are the one that is going to go and collect the data. Come up with the issue you want to address. Then develop your conceptual framework and hypothesis. That thing that you want to study, what are the factors related to it? What would you like to study in relation to the issue? It is when you've itemized all this, you've outlined it, that you now go and review available secondary data sets and variable. You now go and look at, okay, what are the data sets? Is there any data set that has the variable I'm interested in that I can use to answer this issue that I'm interested in and answer the hypothesis? For instance, now, if you're interested in maybe women's empowerment and nutrition, so DHS is one of the data sets you can use. But DHS, it doesn't really have some of the standard variables that you need to measure women's empowerment. It doesn't have it. But there are like 16 variables or so that you can use from DHS to calculate a women's empowerment index that has been shown to be fairly valid or highly correlated with the standard indicators. So maybe I wanted to say, oh, it's women's empowerment, but by the time I looked in the data, I realized it's women's decision making that is there. I can't really call it empowerment because the data does not cover all the dimensions of empowerment. It only covers these dimensions. So I'll now say, my research question is, I can no longer say, I won't say women's empowerment anymore. I'll say women's decision making. Something like that. The DHS has more than women's decision making. It's just an example. So you may have to refine your question to match the available data, but don't start with the available data, like I said. Then you check the sample size, like the person who wanted to answer the question about the elderly. The data the person was interested in would be in that data set, the variables, all the variables could be there. But the challenge could be that the target population, the elderly, 65 and above, they are not in the data set. Those are in the data set are younger. So this is why it's important to also check the target population, check the sample size, particularly if you are using a subset of the data. Particularly when you're using the subset of the data, you can check the sample size to be sure. If, for instance, I want to use data on women, adolescent women in DHS, I know the data is only 15 to 19. What is the population of 15 to 19 in that data set? Is it still going to be sufficient to answer my research question? Then after that, you now develop a data analysis plan. How are you going to analyze the data? I talked about women's empowerment now, that some of the standard indicators are not there, but you can still use about 16 or 17 variables to generate something very valid on women's empowerment. So collapsing that 17 variables into one variable, women's empowerment variable, that is part of my analysis plan. It says what indicators will you generate, what variables will you use to generate them. A lot of the time you see wealth index. Wealth index Sometimes it's maybe 40 variables that are used to generate a wealth index to classify householders poorest, poorer, middle, richer, and richest. So all those are things that before you start running any analysis, you have to have a data analysis plan based on theory, based on what other researchers have done. What are you going to do? Then what statistical test will you run? That one is beyond this webinar, like I said. You have to know the statistical test to run based on the variables, based on the data, based on the distribution of the data. Is it normally distributed? Is it a categorical variable? Is it continuous variable? Is it ordinal? Is it all of those things you have to check before you now run the analysis. Using secondary data does not absolve you of responsible data analysis. It is not a band-aid to me. You can also do anything you like. The only thing that it does for you is that somebody has given you data instead of you going to go and collect it yourself. All the things that apply to ethics and responsible use of primary data still apply to the secondary data. Check data quality. There are tests of data quality. Before you reach conclusion on your analysis, run the data quality checks to be sure that the particular variables you are using. Remember that the data was not collected to answer your research question. So that based on the research question you want to answer, based on the population, that you still have quality data, not too many missing and all of that. And I've said it before, never use AI to mine secondary data and write automated paper. That is a no-no. That's not the kind of research you're talking about. Okay, let me see. Okay, yes. So this is my second to the last slide. So this is an activity for you. You can put your answers in the chat box. I'll just respond to some of the comments that are already in the chat box. So Evelyn says, I think this is an insight to look out for research that one can easily use this secondary data for policy-related data. I am a member of the WHO for Food Systems Committee of Practice. I would like to know what the organization is doing in this area in Nigeria. I'm not sure what area you're talking about, and I'm not sure which organization because I work with several organizations. So please, Evelyn, please clarify that question. And then Evelyn still says, I'm a clinical dietitian and I've used the health system information to assess the prevalence of gestational diabetes in my health facility. Secondary data can be used along with primary data depending on the objectives of research. Very true, very, very true. And that's the issue about triangulation I mentioned. Then Jonathan Lucas says, institutions need to be sensitized about the value of secondary data research. In my department, it's not usually accepted. So Jonathan, one of the ways you can change that is by doing all of this we've talked about. When you do triangulation and you go and you present the research and you link all these groups and say, so this is what we found in this community very close to us, and this is how it relates to what's happening across the country, and these are some of the different, and people see the kind of research that you brought about and see that you have national data. How did you do it? Then the conversation that needs to happen will start happening. That was how we were able to change the culture at the University of Ibadan. When people saw the kind of research that was coming out when you use both secondary data and primary data and the inferences we could make, it really changed the perspective. Then Goodness is saying, for the part where we compare data from different sources in the same year to check consistency, how would that be possible? For example, NDHS and MIX are not always published in the same year. Yes, now it is even if they are published in the same year now, there are recommendations about what both of them should not collect anthropometry. If NDHS and MIX are published in the same year, they will say MIX should not collect anthropometry to prevent this confusion that they will be you collect data in the same year. The same government institution will collect data in the same year, and the conclusion will be different, and you'll be wondering that, what happened. And the data is high quality data. It usually has to do with the fact that different surveys have the sampling is different. Some will sample individuals, some will sample households and all of that. But how many people will you be explaining that one for? So right now, most of them are not in the same year. And even when they're in the same year, there are some data that they won't both collect. The question is coming from an example of doing data triangulation. Data triangulation does not always mean comparing data in the same year. It could mean comparing the trend. So if I take DHS now, I mentioned that one, for stunting and waste, but mostly for stunting, you see, if you plot DHS and mix for Nigeria, and then there was NNHS, you see it will be like wave is going up, is coming down, is going up, is coming down. I say, what exactly is the situation with stunting? We are not sure. Because even though we are collecting data, which one should we go with? Is it NHS? Is it mix? Until we were able to align and say, okay, this is the methodology for this purpose. This is the one we'll go with. So checking triangulation does not always mean it's the same year. It was just an example to show that you have to check. You can triangulate by checking consistency of the data. Then, okay, YouTube channel, I think Precious, okay, Gideon already responded to that. Okay, so nobody has responded to this question, but yes, think about the data sets that aligns best with your current research interests, and consider research questions you can explore using existing data sets. So to conclude, my key message is secondary data are abundant and underutilized in nutrition research in Africa. Secondary data offer opportunities for high quality, policy relevant, and publishable studies. Responsible use of secondary data requires understanding the data sets, respecting ethics, and crafting clear research questions. And then, by God's grace, tomorrow we'll look at we'll do some hands-on demonstrations of DHS and LSMS, maybe a little bit of mix too. And here I have links. It will be very helpful if in advance of tomorrow's session, you go to at least DHS Mix and the World Bank Microdata Library to download some of these data sets. For DHS and Mix, you have to request. DHS, you have to write a short abstract of what the analysis you plan to do with the data. And sometimes it can take up to maybe, I can't remember how many days they say it will take before they respond to you. It's people in the US that respond. If you send in your request now, maybe before we meet tomorrow, they may have granted it. I think Mix is faster to get the approval. And then the World Bank LSMS, I don't think you need any approval at all. Maybe you just have to register also. And then you get the link to data set. So please, again, tomorrow, it will be very helpful if you're able to download these data sets. Thank you very much.
Wow. Never use AI to mine secondary data and write an automated paper. Thank you, Dr. Olutayo Adeyemi, for this informative and engaging session. Please, if you know you got value for your time, could you use your favorite emoji to tell our facilitator thank you? We'll be concluding today's session here. But before we go, try and download the data using the links she shared. And thank you for joining us. I want to ask again, hope you got value for your time. If yes is your answer, join us tomorrow by 7 p.m. West African time for mastering the practical applications using secondary data source. Before I go, I want to say a very big thank you to Dr. Adeyemi and another thank you to our participants. From us as NDDI is good night for now. Bye.